3, 2, 1. How's it going, everyone? You are watching another episode of the CRIMINALCAST, brought to you by the Unnamed Indie Comics Show with your fellow criminals, the wonderful Eric Breen and the regular Skip and Tosh, who are the stars of the show. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you guys doing this afternoon, evening?
Which one of us would you like to go first?
Well, you already did, kind sir.
Well, I thought I'd just throw that in. And I am doing wonderful. And Skip, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. And Ash, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Got myself a beer for the show. I was drinking the bourbon on these shows, but it's been killing me on for the next day to work. Getting old is I just do not recover. So I'm hoping just a beer will be a little bit easier on this old soul. You guys have any refreshments tonight?
I have. Breen's got his usual. I'm guessing that's the Coke Zero.
That would be correct, sir.
Nice. I switched it up this time. Usually I'll have my trusty Gatorade, but I got to throw a curveball at the CRIMINALCAST people who are watching live as well as listening back to this either on YouTube or audio. We appreciate you. This time around, I got myself a little bit of sweet tea because ain't nothing sweet about this book that we're talking about tonight.
No. Holy cow. So you guys in the audience listening into us, whether it's live, thank you for being here. Please, and if you are live, please throw your comments. I know we don't do a lot of comment interaction on this particular show because it's more driven on the topic. But if there are good questions out there, good topics, we will address those. And we do see them. Like, we want to know, and it does help us, the feedback and just your opinions. They do matter. And if you're listening in after the fact, you can leave comments down below, or if you're on a podcast, you're happy to listen there. I'm not sure what options you have for feedback, but thank you for hearing it. We love doing this show. This podcast is dedicated to all things, well, most things Ed Brubaker and his partner in crime, Sean Phillips. They're mostly known in the independent field for their criminal series, which is hence the name of the podcast. And we basically, we're just fans of these guys, and we cover all their indie work. Now, we know that Ed has made a name for himself in mainstream comics and things, and we're definitely fans of those too, but it's really not subject matter, so you won't find us talking about those. Furthermore, this is kind of a fan cast, not really a critical cast, so don't expect us to get too down and heavy. Not that there's really anything I could ever imagine being negative about these books anyway. These are, by far and away, I feel like Ed Brubaker is playing in a different league. I just feel like he's every time I read one of his books, I'm just like, man, most of the comic industry is just, it's like the difference between, high school football and professional football. Like it's just so vastly different. This guy is truly a master of his craft. And I thank both of you guys for being kind of veterans who brought me to discover Ed and Sean. So this book threw me for a loop. Every time, I don't know what to expect. But this one was dark. This one was like a sucker punch, but kind of in a good way, as books usually are. What are you guys' kind of overall, just before we get into the details, just your overall, any specific thoughts about this book?
Honestly, the title tells you a lot about the tone of it, I would say. The Dead and the Dying is the name of Volume 3, the third installation from the original run of the criminal series by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, colors by Val Staples. This was when it was still being published through Icon, which was a part of which was part of Marvel Comics at the time. And if I remember reading an interview from Ed Brubaker, and if I remember correctly, he said during this time when he was writing this particular one was a very dark time in his life, a very depressing time. I also believe this one. Okay, no. I almost got part of the details mixed up with actually volume 6, which was another dark period of his life where he had just lost his father around volume 6. So volume 6, you'll see when we eventually get there, is very much about, even more so about like father and son relationship between Teague and what's the not Ricky, but what was the other Tracy, Teague and Tracy Lawless. But this one in particular, we get a lot more. I would say this one is kind of a little more world building because we get the perspective of some different people that aren't like directly, tied into just the Lawless family, but the tone is it's very dark, and there's really no close to no hope that you find within this volume of this book. What are some of your thoughts?
Go for it, Eric.
What he said.
Oh man.
I got this book and I thought, man, I could use a little cheering up. and then I read this book and I said, man, I could use a little cheering up. These books should come with the old 60s slogan, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Because you read a Brubaker book, especially the criminal series, you kind of know what you're in for. And one of the cool things about the way we're doing it, not reading them in order, we know exactly what to expect at this point. I'm sure that by the third volume, you kind of got an idea if you were reading them in order that, yeah, this ain't a happy place that he's created. But yeah, this one, I said that this one, it was one emotional wallop after another. I mean, I think all three of them, in their own ways, just really, painted such a bleak landscape that these people exist in. And I said, this was, these books never disappoint. And how about you, Ash? Any initial takes?
Well, like I said, you kind of hit it the same thing. It's like, I was needing some cheering up, so I read this, and for me, it's like, then I read this, and now I need a lot of cheering up. I get that his books are normally, they're about criminals, and one of the things I really respect about Ed Brubaker on these is he doesn't really. I don't want to say he doesn't romanticize it. There is a little bit of romanticizing, but he doesn't have that sort of like Hollywood sort of just willful ignorance of reality. Like, he's not living in La La Land. He's understanding like these are hardened criminals who don't have good lives. There's a reason why being a criminal is bad. And it tends to, one of the things I've always been observing is that these characters always tend to get what they deserve. There's a lot of themes of like live by the sword, die by the sword type things and so forth. And for the most part, though, you find like some sympathy with these characters, that, they were down on their luck and maybe, had an abusive father, or their father was a criminal and they just sort of fit in. And none of that's different here, but you sort of at least see the goodness in some of these characters, that they just live low down lives. They're not really abhorrent people. They just are lawbreakers. They're outlaws. But this book was just, I mean, we're going to get into it, but one of the main characters is just a bad person. And I'm curious if you guys had the same take as me, because I was like, wow. And you feel sympathy for this person because, like always, there's a reason. It's not like they just had a great life and then decided to be a bad person or whatever. They had a lot of problems, but still also opportunities to, make better choices, and they don't. And some of the things that they do, you're just like, and then they end up hurting other people that get caught in the crossfire. I don't want to say too much because I want to talk about it when we get into the original thing. But this one, like I said, it just really hit me hard. I was like, this is like this was a tragedy. That's what I'm gonna say. This book was, it felt to me, it was absolutely just almost like no one wins. You close the book when it's over and go, I'm gonna make better choices for my life because, whew.
I'm going to say real quick, there's only one character in this book that is deserving of even an ounce of sympathy.
Okay.
Everybody else, either went along willingly, stayed on the ride till the end, and what say we get into it?
I agree. Skip.
Indeed. So it's broken up into 3 different segments this time. We're following 3 different characters along for the ride. The first one is called Second Chance in Hell. We get introduced. So this particular story is the story of, gosh, am I forgetting the guy who owns the Undertow in modern time?
Gnarly.
So this is Gnarly's backstory. We get the background for Gnarly in this. It tells the story of how Gnarly, where he came from as far as his family. His father was a hitter for a gang, and that gang had decided that they were going to kind of go with a certain leadership. And so his father's name was Cleavon. He was sent out to, he was sent out to do the hit on that person, but that person ended up talking him into pulling hitting and whacking the rest of the crew, and then them two leading it. So because of that, it was an opportunity that Harley's dad Cleavon got, and he was able to elevate the family. So they got more money because they were in control of more of the gang now, and operation and business was going good. Gnarly became friends with Sebastian, who was the son of Sebastian Hyde, who was the son of that member that Gnarly's dad Cleavon had grouped with in order to take over that gang. But now that they're older, Cleavon and Sebastian had grown up together, and they were kind of on 2 different roads. Sebastian is trying to follow in the footsteps of his father to show that he's hard and whatnot, and and live up to the family name, while Gnarly isn't worried about that. Everybody already knew that his dad was vetted. Everybody knew that his dad was a hitter, was a hitman, and he had nothing to prove, and he kind of wanted to carve his own path as opposed to just following in his father's footsteps. And that particular thing puts these 2 best friends at a head as Sebastian's trying to make a name for himself, and different people are testing his business, and he's having to respond in order to prove to his dad that he can run the business and prove to the streets that he's not a guy that you can cross. He keeps going to Jake Gnarly, because Gnarly is like a big old guy. He's a professional boxer now with a budding career, and Gnarly doesn't want anything to do with that. So Sebastian keeps coming to him. Gnarly keeps telling him, like, hey man, like, I helped you out before in the past, but that's got to change because I got to go straight. I got to go clean. And in the midst of that part of the relationship where Sebastian mostly respects Gnarly's wishes, of course, a woman comes up in between them. Gnarly, this woman named Danny. Gnarly is like, oh yeah, go ahead. He loves her, but he's like, I know my friend Sebastian is into you too, and he can provide you a good life, and but he still really loves her. So in the course of Sebastian's crazy life and this woman that Sebastian and Gnarly fall in love with, this woman Danny ends up getting pregnant by Sebastian. Sebastian's father isn't having it, so they end up taking care of the situation, so to speak. I'll kind of leave that part nebulous for when we really start discussing it. But once Gnarly finds out what was done to Danny and him still having feelings for her, he goes and he checks Sebastian in front of his guys. That's a big no-no, because Sebastian has to retaliate and prove that you don't do that. So in return, Sebastian sends his guys to Gnarly, and they end up breaking Gnarly's leg. And the injury is so gruesome that he can no longer box. So there goes his boxing career and his way out of that type of life, that he was trying to get away from. They're really good friends, and Sebastian ends up, going and visiting him while he was in the hospital, and tries to talk to him and let him know, like, I couldn't just let you do that. I have to protect my image. And Gnarly wasn't trying to hear any of it. That was pretty much the end of their relationship. Their roads that were once joined go in opposite directions now, and they both got to figure out how to live their lives apart from each other and face new challenges.
Mr. Breen, what was how did you, first of all, let me ask you, what was your take on this being broken up into sort of 3 vignettes rather than one full length story like is typical?
I liked it because there's 3 distinct stories that all converge, but it's how they got to that point, and I like the way he broke it up like this, because I said again, 3 distinct stories. There's Jake, later Gnarly, and Sebastian, the sons of 2 criminals, how their paths intersected and then diverged. The classic woman that comes between them. It's like one of those where, like, if Walter hadn't done what he did to Danny, would Sebastian have ended up the completely soulless bastard that he becomes? And if Jake makes a different decision, does any of this happen? We'll never know. But for the purpose of this story, we find out. I like this. We find out that by the time we get to the 3rd part, we know what has happened to Danny, which kind of makes that much more interesting, that we wouldn't have gotten if he had done this as a now, straight through story.
When you're saying Danny, are you referring to Danica?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So for those of you, I'm assuming everyone's read this book. Hopefully you guys aren't watching this show and letting us spoil it for you. You're ruining a great experience. But there's some people, they just want to hear about things. So Danica is going to be the female protagonist. We've seen her, but haven't really gotten much into her. Jake and Gnarly are the same person. And then Sebastian, of course, is his friend. They're both sons of these 2 guys that you see on the first page. Cleavon is going to kill, I forget what Sebastian's father's name was.
Walter,
that's right.
Walter Hyde.
So Walter Hyde. He's kind of a little pussy guy, and he pissed off the crime boss, but he's smart. He's a little weasel, and he comes up with a plan. And Cleavon, I love this idea. I love that, Cleavon's a good made man. He's working for, but he realizes, this is like in the 50s, as a black man, he's got limits in his life. And they talk about this right in the first few paragraphs. And Walter is like, look, I got this idea, you saved my life. And Cleavon's not a stupid man either. And he's just like, this could work out for me. And they take out the gang, and now Walter, instead of just being a low-life hitman, is now number 2. He can't be
right there in the next page where he goes, unofficially, he's the big leg breaker, whatever said, or officially he's the chauffeur, enforcer. Unofficially, he's his most trusted advisor. So that's
right, because society wouldn't really, even
right.
in criminal society, he couldn't be the boss. But he could be the number 2, especially when it's kind of on the down low. And that's much better for him. And they both have kids, and those kids grow up together. And, then they grow up to be adults. And Sebastian, and true to the theme of the Hydes, they kind of make it sound like, the Hydes are always these little Weasley guys, but they always luck out. And, the son here, Cleavon's son, which is Gnarly, is a character that we got introduced to in various other books. He's sort of a side character working at the main bar, as Eric had said. This was fascinating to me because I was like, oh, yeah, Gnarly's story. Where did Gnarly come from? Because you never knew. You just saw him. He's this imposing fellow. yeah, you see it's a girl that comes between them, and you talk about like the different choices that you can make. This woman here, Danica, Gnarly's a good guy. Like, he's a criminal, but it's due to a circumstance. He's trying to play straight. He's trying to do things. He's he treats Sebastian like a brother. And so when he realizes that Sebastian has fallen harder for this girl than he has, he's like, I'll step back, and he even encourages her to go with him, even though he likes her. And all this, I think, would be different, the scenarios and outcomes, if he would have just, you know what? No, I like her. I'm going to go for her. And if Danica had been with him, like, none of this tragedy happens, I don't think. But, who knows where things would go. But it reminds me of something my old English lit teacher taught me, and that I didn't get it at first back in those days, but it's rings true in great story writing these days, is no good deed goes unpunished. And I forget which poet or who was famous for, but I remember the time I was like, no good deed goes unpunished, but it's always the making of a good tragedy when you have a character. And this is a guy who's like doing a good deed, and boy does he get punished for it. And yeah, this story a little threw me off because I wasn't really knowing to expect the 3 vignettes or anything like that. So when it ended, I was like, oh, wait, that's weird. But by the time all 3 were done, I liked how they all tied back. Kind of reminded me a bit of like how Pulp Fiction kind of worked in that way, where there were different stories, but then by the end of it, you saw how they all connected. I really enjoyed this, and I really like Gnarly as a character. I hope there's more, he gets used more in future stories. What about you, Skip? What about this first story that something you want to talk about?
Yeah, you mentioned, Gnarly. Breen had mentioned as well that there was one character in the story that deserved a little bit of sympathy, and that would be Gnarly. And yeah, he was the one that was trying to carve out his own path, like I'd mentioned, and I think part of that is, I think part of that ties back to the parents, as someone who's got both law enforcement and criminals in his family, I've kind of see it play out in my own life where if usually when the parent, or the father is respected, and kind of not known for what they have, but known for their reputation and what they do, usually, not always, the younger kid, like doesn't always feel like they have to, follow in their father's footsteps. Usually doesn't feel like they have a lot to prove. Of course, that's a little different when it comes to Ricky Lawless and Teague Lawless. Ricky always felt like he was trying to outdo his father, but in most circumstances that I've seen, usually that's not the issue. But in other cases where, the son is more known for what they have because what the father has and provides for them, and not necessarily what the father has done, but what the father heads up and what the father, possesses, then sometimes they feel like they got something to prove. And in that particular case, it, instead of being in control of their lives, although they're in control of their decisions, they kind of more so, are riding by the seat of their pants in their life as they're going from, circumstance, just trying to put out fires and prove themselves, as opposed to saying, hey, I'm going to carve out my own path. I'm going to be my own man. What my father did is what my father did. Share last names, but that's where it stops. We ain't the same people. So that was something that I felt like was, played a big role ultimately in, kind of where they're at once we meet them as adults in the story, and then kind of where things go. And I do agree that, if, no, like we said, no good deed goes unpunished. If Gnarly, would have been a little more selfish, which was kind of already his inclination. He was, carving out things for himself, his own path. If he had been a little more selfish with Danica, yeah, she, at the very least, she could have been spared some of the more gruesome things that we find out that she endured later, let alone what we already find out in this, in here, because in this story we find out that she dies. She was killed.
Well, there's one thing about her. That again, this is where he always leaves everything open for interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
It may not have made a difference because, as we find out as the story progresses, Danica has a propensity for rich white dudes.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah, that is something that we see be a very, very big part of not just her story, but really everyone's story as they're intertwined, in these vignettes, which I very much appreciated. Like, I know there's popular ways to tell stories, but I love stories so much. I'm open to, maybe just different styles that aren't explored as much these days. Vignettes are something that I've always appreciated, small bite-sized things, and it's, Tarantino style, you can rearrange them. So, I think part of, to kind of go into comics in general for 20 seconds, I think part of the reason why we enjoy comics, I think comics are for people that like to play in their imagination a little bit more. Obviously with film, within a scene, we see every frame that was shot by the camera. With comics, there's, we're spliced in between moments a lot more. We get tiny little slivers, and our imaginations have to fill in those blanks. And I appreciate the fact that we got these 3 different vignettes, and that's something that our 3 brains had to do. Like Brubaker put the pieces of the puzzle out, but we had to put it together, and I think there's a little more reward once we allow our brains to take the time and to do that work. So I really enjoyed not only this segment but the other 2 that we're getting ready to get into.
So Eric, you had said that before the show you actually read through this book twice during the past couple weeks.
I saw every disgusting frame of it twice.
No, I'm curious because when I was reading through, I only read it once so far. And, I read the first vignette and you see like all what's going on. But as we're discussing it and we're flipping through the pages right now, I'm kind of realizing that I'm seeing these frames and these scenes in a different perspective now that I know how things turn out, right? Like, for example, here we have on the screen is the morgue scene where Gnarly has to identify Danica because she's dead. At the time when you're reading this, you're making assumptions about what happened. You don't necessarily know what caused her death. You just only have a little bit to work with. And by the time you've finished all 3 of these stories, you get to see, there's basically 3 viewpoints of all that transpired, and each vignette seems to only give you kind of a third of that viewpoint, so you're missing a lot. And by the time you get through the whole thing, you're like, oh, and so now I'm seeing like, oh, I know what happened to Danica now. Like, I'm watching, I know what caused, I know, what caused Sebastian to behave the way that he did, and these motives. So I'm just curious for you, did you find that when you went through it a second time that any of these things not necessarily played out differently, but maybe impacted you differently, or you appreciated more because you kind of had the perspective of being more conscious about how it all was going to play out?
I don't know if I did. I mean, at first I kind of look at this as like the comic equivalent of the 3 blind men and the elephant.
Okay.
When I read it the first, I mean, I knew, that it was. See, I don't know if I was supposed to know it was going to be 3 vignettes, but when I saw 3 stories, I just that's my mind went. There's going to be 3 distinct stories that all come together. So when I read it the second time, it was more like, I know what's coming. But I kind of knew what was coming when I read it the first time based on, by reading the back cover. And again, I said, now, lest anybody think that I'm trying to show that I'm smart, my dumbass didn't even figure out that was the bartender from other criminal stories. So. The hell do I know? But it's like, when you said, I said, wow, did anybody else hear those bells going off in my head?
Yeah, they were that loud, huh?
I just found myself really appreciating because I didn't understand some of the motivations Like, you know, I didn't necessarily understand some of why Sebastian behaved the way he did. I just had to take it at face value because that's how the book's being written, right? Oh, Sebastian is this way. But then later on, we're going to see how some of these events play out. You're like, oh, this is why maybe you reacted this way. This is why. And I just found that really interesting going back now and seeing it again, going, yeah, these things make more sense. Things are more clear now. And I just think that that's really a fantastic. I think it's a testimony to the writing that you can get even more out of it the second time because of that.
Yeah, I guess if I didn't, get a whole lot of different the second time than the first time is, you mentioned Sebastian Hyde. On my first reading, I'm looking at, okay, he is the son of a crime boss in Ed Brubaker's world of criminals. I kind of know he's going to be a shitheel.
It's true.
So, yes, and you read enough of these, you kind of know. But I said, I am notorious for missing the obvious, as I just confessed to. But like I'll get things that maybe I wasn't supposed to and miss things that are pie in the face obvious. But I kind of knew, the only thing I was surprised by, I guess, was that, and I shouldn't have been, is we'll find out in the second vignette that Ricky's problems ended up being with Sebastian because of a dumbass decision that or that Teague, his problems became involved him with Sebastian because of a dumb decision he made. But then, not surprised that Teague made the dumb decision. That's kind of his MO. But then I remember, okay, this story weaves all these moving parts together. So,
well, speaking of our man Teague, here he is on the cover, and unless there was anything more you wanted to add about the first vignette, we can jump now to the second one.
Last thing I'll add about the first vignette is I think we might have briefly touched it, but it also plays a role into how Gnarly ended up being coming into taking over the Undertow, not in kind of more in broad strokes, but we'll find out later, next in this story, that the previous owner of when it was originally called the Undertown, that was what it was originally named. The previous owner gets kind of mixed up in some of the business, which I guess how could you not when you're there? So we'll see that play out, and then finally, there is, I know it was one of the previous stories. It must have not been Coward. It must have been because Lawless is before this one. Within that story, I remember that Gnarly, Tracy was talking to Gnarly at the bar, I think trying to get more info or something, trying to get help from Gnarly with something. And Gnarly straight dissed him and was like, you're a Lawless, all it don't matter, if you were the one that isn't known to be as crazy as your brother and your dad, if you're a Lawless, you guys are all nuts. You're all gonna ultimately end up doing horrible, terrible things. And
right.
We end up finding out a little bit of why Gnarly felt that way. But on that note, A Wolf Among Wolves. This story is primarily given some back history about Teague Lawless, aka Teague Lawless. He was coming back from war. I believe it was Vietnam that he was fighting in. So he's got a little bit of shell shock, and he's dealing with being traumatized from being over there. So his relationship with his wife is starting to change a little bit as he's not confiding in her kind of what he's dealing with, but kind of doing the age-old thing of trying to handle it by himself and kind of keeping it all in his head instead of letting it out. In the midst of all that, he goes and meets up with one of his old buddies, and kind of gets back to his party lifestyle that he kind of had before he left, but more so now it's trying to escape what's going on in his head. And through the midst of the crazy night, comes upon some people that him and his friend up and remind him that he's he owed money before he left, and just because he, is a war hero, don't mean that his debts are forgiven. And matter of fact, he owes with interest. So now he's got to figure a way to get that money, because they said they're going to harm his family if he doesn't. So that's extra incentive for him, and he grows even more distant with his wife. We'll get into a little bit of those details later, but he's at the Undertow, and it's that owner who I believe at the time his name. Oh yeah, Hamson was his name, and he tells T, because he knows he's crazy. He's like, hey, there's an opportunity to make more money. You can take a certain portion of it, and it'll be very fruitful to you. And of course, T can't pass it up, because outside of doing small jobs, he doesn't really have another way to come up with large sums of money. But in order to do the job, Hamson hooks him up with Danica, and Danica is kind of like his really someone who's kind of supposed to keep tabs on him, and kind of be his in to the job, and Hamson can keep an eye out on him. But Danica and Teague, start to have a little bit of intimate time together, and finally it's time to do the job. So Teague goes in there, and in Teague Lawless fashion, he is very much like a battering ram and a hammer. That's the only tool he uses for every job. Even if he needs a screwdriver, he'll just nail the screw in instead of screwing it in. So he goes in, guns blazing. They shoot everybody up. They take the money. They go back to where they're supposed to meet up at, and that's when Teague starts to find out that everything is not what he thought it was, and ultimately they hit some people, but the people that they hit were we come to find out were the Hydes, and that ties into the previous story. So that's a big no-no. So now Teague has got him. They want to kill him. So they know again that he is just this crazy force of nature. So they give him an opportunity to get the money back, kind of clean everything up and make it right. So he goes back through the process of, killing Hanson. He's got to take out his buddy that did the gig with him. And then ultimately he meets up with Danica, who also kind of threw a wrench in the plan of them trying to take a little bit of their own portion, if I remember correctly. And since Danica was a part of tying up loose ends, Teague ties her up too, and shifts her off the mortal coil with a knife. And now that everything is done, and he cleans up his buddy finally as the last thing. All debts are paid off. He goes and he lets those guys, lets the Hydes know that everything is taken care of, but he's not off the hook. The Hydes are going to keep him on the payroll.
In this criminal universe that Ed writes about, right? And they all interconnect in various ways. And for some reason, I was just thinking like Teague Lawless was one of the brothers or whatever. No, he's the father. And these little kids that we're seeing here, those little kids are Tracy and what's the other one? Ricky, right? It doesn't say that in the book. The only way you would know that is if you read some of the other books, and some of those books don't even come out until after this book. So it's really fascinating. You can definitely read these books in any order, and I think that's a really added bonus for readers. These books are phenomenally written. Like, the book would not suffer in any way if it didn't have that, but it feels like a cherry on top, at least for me. I love connected universes, and I love seeing, like, we're seeing a story of Teague Lawless. Well, the only way I knew Teague was in this, story where we got with Ricky and him growing up, living under the brutality of his dad, which is Teague. He didn't really know much. He was just the father figure, but here you get to see who this guy really is and the things that he's done, and you get to see how he actually treats his mother. Like, damn, now I know why you're like, he's a total dick, and we can see kind of why. I think one of the reasons I missed this is when I was reading this particular story, it really made me think of my dad. My dad also was a Vietnam vet. He did 3 tours, had multiple Purple Hearts. He was a Navy corpsman. He got infected with Agent Orange. Like, he got the works. You want to hear like the stories of the brutality of Vietnam and how, like, my dad was one of those, like, he's just the poster child of that. And he wasn't in my life because he was something out of a criminal book, right? Like, he put a shotgun to my mom's head type thing. Police had to be called, like really bad sort of things. And I never like knew about that. I just knew that he was kind of a deadbeat dad sort of thing growing up. I was just under a single household. But as I grew up and throughout life and in my adult years, I got to, my grandparents piece things together for me in the history and, whatever. And so I knew factually. And so reading this story made me connect to him in a little bit of a way, because although he didn't turn out into a criminal mastermind like Teague, or not that Teague's a criminal mastermind, you know what I'm saying? He didn't turn out into a career criminal. He was a very messed up person. And I'm sure, I don't know the details, and unfortunately he's passed on, but he's did probably some bad things, throughout his life. And seeing this helped me just kind of like, I bet some of this was like similar, like under my dad, seeing like this scene here, for those of you who can see on the screen, like the craziness in his eyes when his wife's trying to connect to him and she's just like scared, and he's just a messed up dude. And you get to see some of these panels from Vietnam and so forth. And I mean, none of that really excuses who he is, but I'm just saying, like, for me, sometimes you have that connective tissue because of your own personal life experiences that allow you to take away something that maybe others may not. That was something for me that was really hitting me. That was like prevalent in my mind as I was reading this story. And I think that's why I missed some of the details of like, oh, that's actually the kids, Tracy and Ricky. And I don't know why I'm just sort of just blurting out loud these things. But I like talking about stories. I like hearing how they affect people. I like hearing how they take them away. Because like I said, we're all just we come from different backgrounds, different ways of life and things. And I love how Ed doesn't just tie things together, but it all makes sense. Like when we see these stories of Teague elsewhere, this was kind of all understood. Like we didn't have that piece of the puzzle yet, but it was there. And now it's being revealed to us. And it's fascinating that you can read these in any order, because it's not a part of a linear narrative, but it does explain like motivations to the character and what drives them. This Danica here, this took me by a shock. And I know I'm monopolizing the mic here. I'll turn it over in a minute, but I did not expect to see the death of Danica in the second vignette. That was surprising, but going back, we know she was going to eventually die because we saw her in the morgue. But this goes to one of those things like, oh, it was Teague that killed her. I was thinking the whole time, Sebastian. That was one of those conclusions. I was like, wait, Teague's involved in all this. Like, what the heck's going on? And I like that Ed threw me for a loop. And then I was like, well, if she's dead in the middle of the book, like I thought this was going to be more all about her. But anyway, I don't know. I'm kind of blabbing at the moment, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Eric. Anything you want to talk about, feel free. The mic is yours.
This is where I went 1 for 2. I didn't realize that was Gnarly the bar guy, but I did know that was Ricky and Tracy.
Well, there you go.
At least I got that one right.
You're at least as smart as me.
And let me amend a previous statement. Oh yeah, I'm tingly all over. I said that Danica had a propensity for rich white dudes. No, she just had a propensity for white dudes.
Yeah, that's true. Because Teague is not rich.
Yeah. This might be the best single example of just how shitty everybody is in Brubaker world. Because Gnarly's not in this vignette. You think about when Teague gets busted, when he has to go, and I'm using finger quotes, make things right. He kills his best friend. He kills the woman he's cheating on his wife with. And Sebastian, the father of what would have been his baby, the mother of what would have been his baby, is fine with it. Because his dope money means more than someone that he professed to love at one point. Total piece of shit. Everybody in the story is a total piece of shit.
I don't. This is like one of those things where you were mentioning before, and I agree with you, like the ambiguity and sort of how you can take things different. I don't hold the wife, the kid's mother in that same regard. I see her.
I'm not talking about her. She's a bit player in this. I'm talking about Sebastian, Teague, Danica. 3 for 3.
Okay, yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I got confused. I thought you were talking about the wife.
I should have exempted Mrs. Lawless from that.
She is she's not great, but she's definitely like trapped, right? She got 2 kids. She can't take care of herself. She kind of relies on Teague. She has feelings for Teague. He's just horrible and abusive. Yeah, it sucks.
And I'm not saying that Danica deserved to die, but she knew that she was screwing Teague over. Yeah, she knew whose money it was because she was probably trying to stick it to Sebastian.
Yes, she involved Teague into something that he had nothing to do with, right? Like, he just happened to be a player that she could use so she could get some of her petty vengeance on Sebastian, risking basically his life, playing with it. She doesn't care. Yeah. And it's funny because she's one of these women who uses everyone she's with. She just uses them, throws them away, doesn't care. But then kind of, expects not to be, she's like a victim. And it's like, you're everything that you hate. And it's like you're stuck in this position. The reason why you're a bad person is because you refuse to make the choices to escape this. You get stuck in like, well, someone did something bad to me, so now I have to return the hate to them, which is just going to make them return the hate on me until one of us is dead. And it just never works out that way. Like, you said it perfectly in the beginning. There's only one person having sympathy for it, and that's Gnarly, because he was the only person who's trying to rise above. It's like, look, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to box. I'm going to make something of my life. Like, I can't be a part of any of these bad things. And then he, of course, doesn't really matter because he has to pay the price. It's just, it really is a story kind of about just the darkness of humanity. And it almost makes you feel like, well, it doesn't really matter what we do. We're all going to be effed up because if it's not ourselves, it's going to be the people, in our lives that make stupid decisions that involve us. And fortunately it is just fiction, and it is, dramatized for effect. But sorry, I was over, didn't mean to shadow on what you were saying.
No, I said, this story could be summarized in a couple sentences. Life sucks, everybody sucks, then you die.
Jeez.
Skip, please elaborate on what I said and make it make sense.
Brain, happily. Life does suck, and then you die. Hopefully, in between being born and dying, you get to read some Head Brubaker. There you go, Breen. You're welcome. Again, it kind of goes back to the theme of the Lawless family. Wherever there's something horribly, going horribly wrong in the criminal world, there's a Lawless family member like within 50 miles. That's just kind of the law of this story. But it is interesting to go back and get some history on Teagar Lawless, to find out a little bit of the whole trend of tortured souls torturing souls. He has his own past, and in this particular story, he's got his own, not too distant past that's really haunting him. And he's, you know, but what I'll say about Teague Lawless is that his situations are not like a lot of his actions are not due to circumstance. Some of them are, but a lot of where he's at is, you know, it's him directly that caused it. And I'll give him the fact that he knows himself. He knows what he's good at. He knows what he's not good at. And, you know, he may push his luck, but I mean, even that's a part of who he is, and he knows that. So when push comes to shove, it don't take him he's not struggling with his consciousness and everything. He may be fighting with trauma, but but Teague Lawless doesn't have much of a conscience. It's like, you know, he's very much of one of those linear thinkers. I got to get from A to B. So right now I'm at A, and I got to get to B however I can. And one of the things that I'm the best at is just causing destruction and fucking shit up. Pardon my French. So that's pretty much what he does, you know, and what adds complexity to such a simple character like Teague Lawless, simple but interesting. What adds the complexity to the story is the relationships, you know, and how things relate. So in this particular case, you know, he was part of what Danica wanted to do in screwing over Sebastian Hyde and the Hyde and not just Sebastian Hyde, the Hyde family as a whole. And we get, obviously in the next story, we get a little bit more of what her motivations were, you know, in leading into that. And then of course Danica, her story, like, you know, like Breen said, like, you know, like into, you know, definitely into white dudes. And, you know, her that play, you know, one, she's being consistent, and two, that plays into her brokenness. Not that she's into white dudes, but her you know, it's her instincts are always to, in situations where things are out of control, she tries to gain control through intimacy. And what she didn't realize is there's some things that you can't control, even if it's a man, and even if you're using your sexuality. Something that's as blunt of an instrument as a Teague Lawless, there is no controlling that. Right. Ultimately, in the end, and that's what she found out.
Right. Yeah. Teague Lawless was one of the people that her feminine wiles would not affect, you know, or have very minimal. You know, when Teague wants something done, nothing kind of stands in his way, not even his own family. So speaking about Danica's motivations and stuff, we are now into chapter 3, essentially here, the third vignette. And this one is from the perspective or the viewpoint for Danica's story. And we kind of get to see like why she did the things that she did. What in her story, I mean, true to form, man. I mean, she's a wicked, vile person, but Brubaker makes you understand like what turned her into that monster, and we get to see that.
Absolutely. The story starts off with her on the road with a man, and she basically has him you know, under her thumb, in control. She's on her way somewhere, we find out later, and early on we understand that she's into smack, she's into heroin. And we go backwards, we get a little story about back when she was dating Sebastian Hyde. She thought that he was going to propose to her at a dinner, so she shows up with a nice fancy dress. At this point in time, she's pregnant, so even extra incentive for her to believe that that's the case. And Sebastian doesn't show up, but some of his goons do. Once they are able to, you know, kind of coerce her into getting in the car, they lie and say, you know, Sebastian said, come pick you up. She gets in the car. They start roughing her up, stick a needle in her neck, and that's the first time she actually has ever gotten high off of heroin, so it wasn't voluntary. But eventually she wakes up, and when she does, she, you know, through so many means finds out that they had performed an abortion on her. And it, of course, you know, it was a back alley abortion from a back alley doctor. So there's, you know, she's bleeding out. even once they drop her back off at home and she's still drugged and she comes to, she wakes up in pain and she's bleeding out in her bed and she goes to her mother, for help. Her mother takes her to the hospital and they find out the reason why she was bleeding out. And her mother is, ashamed and sends her off to live with her aunt, who is very strict and very religious from what we see in this story. And her aunt, is trying to get her more into church, more into the Bible and everything. But Danica doesn't really want to go that route. So she, lies and kind of plays along, but really isn't interested. But what she's saying is, throughout all these troubles, the interesting thing is that me going and getting high off of the heroin is really the only thing that gives me a release, and kind of takes the edge off. And once her addiction starts to catch up with her and her aunt finds out, her aunt puts her out on the street. Since she's out on the street, she doesn't want to turn tricks, but she doesn't mind getting high and then, being a dancer. So she's stripping at clubs and she gets, she starts, kind of getting into it with men more and more. And she comes to find out after having two men fight over her and one of the men almost kills the other, even though he's a high profile individual, that she, realizes that her sexuality is a weapon. She really literally says, but my pussy was a deadly weapon. So from there, with that realization, she gets to what she doesn't have to really dance much anymore. She just finds men and, kind of plays them for their money. And she moves from man to man. Still, sometimes they're fighting each other, but her past doesn't escape her. She wakes up and, sees herself in that bloody, has visions of being in that bloody wedding dress and her mother turning her back on her, her aunt turning her back on her. And she realizes more and more that even though she's getting better and better at playing men, inside she's getting more and more empty. And the main guy that she's with at that time hires a private investigator and he finds out that she's been with other dudes. He's heartbroken, and he goes as far as to pull a pistol out on her when she tries to leave. And she just uses her feminine wiles, as Ash says, calms him down. They end up sleeping together. And she wakes up early in the morning, writes him a note, and leaves, and also takes his gun as well. And that's when we get back to her being in the car driving with the guy that she's with right now. That dude's trying to get a blowjob for her, and she's not giving up anything. So eventually they get to the city, and we find out that she is effectively back in the city where, where she had met Sebastian, where she had met Gnarly, and she has this life experience now. The guy ends up trying to jump on her, to get something in return for that long car ride, and she ends up shooting him in the gut, just walking away, looking out on the street and accepting that she's going back into that life. She kind of doesn't really have, a lot of hope within her. There's not really like a lot of motivation to kind of do better. Only thing that she really has on her mind is revenge, and she's not afraid of, what could happen to her in the pursuit of that.
All right, Eric. How did you feel about this?
If it's possible for one of these to be anticlimactic, this one kind of was, because I think they're really the only surprise I think that this story had was that she gut shot that guy at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But that also, again, I think that was any sympathy you might have had for her fate, because we knew it in the first vignette, went out the window right there. If there had been any left, because that she proved that she is definitely a member of good standing in the Ed Brubaker shitty humanity club. And somebody didn't. That just as a quick aside, I just realized in the first vignette when Sebastian's talking to Jake, was that his real name? I forgot it already.
Jake Gnarly.
Yeah. He was bitching about the job that Teague had pulled. when he goes, yeah, some effers, broke into my thing, killed a
Yes,
bunch of my
correct.
guys. Yeah, it's a. I don't know why I just glossed over that the first time, but I mean,
Yeah, that's.
I mean,
Oh, go ahead.
no, I said, yeah. I mean, I again, like I said, what I catch and what I don't. It's scary sometimes. We kind of this just filled in the blanks to make us realize that yes, some things might have gone wrong in her life, but she made her choice. She made her bed, and she eventually had to lie in it. And
Well,
it did do a good job of telling us how she got to be who she was.
mm-hmm.
But again, like I said, this one probably had the fewest amount of surprises and twists. I mean, I think I think we kind of knew where this was going, and I mean, I'm not saying it didn't hold up its end of the the 3 parts by any stretch, because it was
Mm-hmm.
it was great, but like I said, it just man, you read a Brubaker book, you realize, man, what a bleak landscape.
Right. This book felt less plot oriented and much more of like a character study, because it's not so much about how do the events play out, like, oh, there's a perfect crime, they're going to do it, and is it going to go wrong, or some of the other stories we've had are a little bit more plot focused. This one had a much looser plot, but it was very much diving into the world of these people and these lives and seeing kind of what drives them. And that's what fascinated me, especially when I got to the second vignette. I mean, I really like Gnarly and I want to see more of him. I didn't particularly like relate to him in any way. My life experiences don't have that connection, but like I talked about with Teague, I felt a lot of, things I maybe missed about my father, and maybe what drove him to be the man he kind of was. And then this, just the story of Danica and kind of what drives her. I feel like one of the common themes that Ed puts in his stories, besides humanity just being effed up, but is the where was I going with this? Man, I just lost it. But essentially, oh, I know what it is. Nice Guys Finish Last. There was a story that we had gone through previously. I can't remember which book it was, but there was a character I remember I was talking about that he was one of the few quote unquote nice guys. Now, he wasn't really a nice, like, he wasn't a good person necessarily per se, but he was when I say nice guy, he was like the polite guy,
Oh, was it Charlie from Fade Out?
And, of course, he's with that woman, and, she's not attracted to him, really, because one of the things about the concept of Nice Guys Finish Last is the sister to that concept, which is women choose men poorly. They like bad guys. They're attracted to the very guy that they shouldn't be with. And that's not a universal thing, of course. I'm talking in generalities, but these are common cliches or stereotypes that we see in stories used a lot because it's a common thing in humanity. And Danica seems to me to be kind of the epitome of a woman who just cannot pick a good guy. Like, the more bad the guy is for her as a choice, the more, like, how she was just completely attracted to Teague, and he was, a loser. When she gets picked up by that brute that Sebastian's dad sends to pick her up, and ultimately, they inject her with heroin and give her a forced abortion. There's a whole dialogue scene where she's talking about how she's getting wet just being around him, because she's just attracted to the worst kinds of things. And sure enough, the very first vignette, which was a story about our boy Gnarly, we identify with him. He's like, yeah, Gnarly's the only sympathetic character. Here's the guy who's trying to get his life together. And he runs across her in her second part of life, which is this vignette where we discovered that's where she's returned to town, and she wants nothing to do with him. And all he wants to do is be like, I want to apologize. I just want to try to help you in any way that I can. He feels bad for his part, any negative parts in her life. She wants nothing to do with him. And that other guy who hires the PI, you're right. He's like, she gets tricked into like believing, or he gets tricked into believing her because she does the feminine wiles, and maybe I can get my life straight. And there's even a thought bubble thing where she's like, maybe I meant it, and because she sees herself, she has a moment where she looks in the mirror and she sees like how she's aging and the effects that constant drug use is having on her. She's not going to be this hot young thing forever. So she's kind of getting in this midlife crisis type of thing. And when she gets caught, here's another out. She has this guy who's like, I'm in love with you. He's he's obviously got money. He may not be super rich, but he can take care of her. She talks about that. Like, oh, maybe, but nope. Because she's ultimately not attracted to that kind of man. And she ends up giving a Dear John letter and taking off. And she can't do the right thing. And ultimately the story comes full circle, and we kind of see the book ends kind of where it begins. I know there was some scenes in the past where the fathers, but where it picks up for the sons, and why she's back in town. This is where she just arrives into town, and that whole loop is closed, and we see the circle. And Eric, you're right. I agree. I didn't find it necessarily climactic, but it felt very satisfying seeing how it all just fit together, and seeing these characters, and you feel for certain characters and that tragedy. And I don't know. I hope I'm explaining myself well. Was there anything else like you guys that saw it differently or felt differently than I did?
Really? Not this time.
Oh, okay.
I mean, for me, it to speak to the truth of really what both of y'all said, Breen talking about, how it was anticlimactic, you talking about how it was fulfilling, since it was, Brubaker employed the nonlinear storytelling. We kind of got the climax in the middle. Like the start, I feel like was a start.
Mm-hmm.
The climax kind of came in the second story. The Lawless story was like had more action, and then there was a true climax at the end of it. And then in this one, we kind of got what I guess would be a middle story, even though if you flipped it around, it would still be nonlinear. But
right.
Or if you put it in the beginning and say, let's find out about Danny first. And I could see, I mean, it would play out like a traditional story, but I think what I appreciated about finding out about her story at the end is that there would have been more closure if Teague's story went last, her story went first, and then Gnarly's went second. But I like that there's really not closure at the end of this. This part of the story just kind of, we started really low and we just went down and down, lower and lower, and just got worse and worse and worse. And that sinking feeling that you get in this story is kind of what kept me into it, and what had me, just kind of connecting with it more and more. In a way, I was almost, one of the men that she, learned how to seduce and seduce well. Like I found myself, feeling sorry for her quite often in this, even as she was doing messed up stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wrong. I was just like, kind of a similar thing. Just like, look at where, your life kind of led you. She didn't voluntarily take heroin, to start.
Right.
Although it is a consequence of the people that she decided to get in bed with, pun intended.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, like the thing that got a hold of her even more than her affinity for the fast life, and the wild side of life was addiction. And we've seen, very good upstanding people, even like the average old mom in suburbia, twist her ankle and then get addicted to, painkillers, oxycodones and whatnot. So as I was watching this, I was definitely feeling like a sympathy for her. And as we gone, down and down and down, and then finally seeing where the story ended, my brain had to do the work of going back to the very first story and to the second and the first story. The first story seeing her dead, the second story seeing her get killed and die, and then in this one to see the story end with her alive, knowing that not only because of the main characters, that the men that she dealt with and got involved with, but her own convictions, why she was on a path to no hope.
You almost said exactly what I was going to say when you finished up. Because if you think about it, she is the star of this book.
Right.
The first issue, or the first story, she's killed. The second story, we find out how she got killed. In the third one, we find out what she did to get killed. What kind of person was led up to that, and that's why I think the order that he tells this story works so well. It's like working backwards through a maze of who this girl was.
Right.
Yeah, and I feel
like
go ahead.
We all know the term "live by the gun, die by the gun." I don't know what would be the equivalent for a type of person like her, but it's interesting that like Breen was just saying, we see her dead, we see how she dies, and then in the last story we see how she lived. And through seeing how she lived, it's no surprise to us at coming to the end of her story,
right,
that's the way that she died.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because before you get to this story, you don't have the context, and you're like, oh, damn, she just gets murdered by Teague, right? Okay, yeah, she did some little shady things, but like I think one of you guys said, like, she didn't deserve to die. Like that's
right. Yeah.
But
she did.
Her as a character, from an audience perspective, your sympathy is sort of taken when you read this last one, because you're like, damn, woman, like you're a piece of work. But I still can't even fully hate her, because Brubaker makes these characters so vividly human, right? Even when they're bad, like this woman is messed up, and I don't want to say I've known women like her in the sense that they've gone nearly as far as her, but with that same psychology of just being broken and making bad choices and going and doing stupid things that basically self-sabotage. That's what she's doing. She's choosing self-sabotage. Every time she has an out, like, hey, this path will probably help you have a better, more normal life. It's unattractive to her. She's like, she finds that choice distasteful, so she chooses the luring choice, which ends up being self-sabotaging, and it constantly is working against her. And her fate is inevitable, because she's not ever choosing any opportunity that comes across her way to salvage whatever she can. It may not be the happily ever after ending, but sometimes you got to take what you can get. And she's just like, nope, if I can't have everything, then I'm just going to keep sabotaging myself. And that's what it kind of felt to me. And I just related to it on that level, because I've known women like that, and just, it's sad to me. It's like, why are you doing this? Like, at some point, I don't know. Men and women think differently. This book really just rang true for me. All the characters, whether or not, obviously they're fictional characters, I found all of their behavior plausible and sensical. And that's what I love. I loved how Brubaker just gets into them, and whether I can agree with their decisions or not, or like them as a person or not, I just I found them real, in a sense, like, and their characters that I was fascinated to just see what more happened in their lives, whether it was good or bad. But it was brutal. Like, at the end of this, you're just like, ooh, jeez. So I really enjoyed this. And the more we talk about it, the more I'm liking it. Because it did throw me a bit for a loop when we got to the end. I was like, oh, I'm used to there being some sort of more traditional type plot resolution. And this doesn't really have. It's just more of almost like a slice of life type of thing, where just we're gonna enter into this little world for a bit, see how these people's lives interconnected, and then we'll exit.
Can I go off the board real quick?
Yeah, go for it, man.
I've got, I happen to glance at the TV and I see this perfume commercial, and there's this tiny little girl running around this field, and I go, oh, she looks fair. Oh yeah, that's Thor. Okay. Now back to our regularly scheduled program.
So not Chris Hemsworth, but Natalie Portman sighting is what we're doing. But Padme showed up. Okay, gotcha.
All right. That was
like
so random.
Hey, that's the happiest thing that we're gonna get out of this whole entire stream.
Perhaps so.
Yeah, this one is just, at best, what we can take away from this, if we turn our heads a little away from entertainment and, maybe towards, things that are applicable to life, total cautionary tale. Not that all of this criminal series isn't, but sometimes, be a little more selfish. Which I don't usually say that to people in a world that I feel like is filled with too much selfishness these days. For some people, maybe only a few, it is good to kind of remember, in some instances, don't always give over your blessings. Some things could be your blessing. But then on the flip side, if we're talking about, Danica, at the same time, Gnarly got a busted leg and his boxing career is gone. But at the same time, it looks like he might have dodged a bullet at the same time. Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips are masters of their craft. Shout out to Val Staples, for providing the colors, to kind of keep this tale dark and gloomy. But this if I remember correctly, out of all the stories, I wouldn't say this is the saddest one, but I would say this is definitely the darkest and the most gloomy, in my personal opinion. But yeah, when you're getting such quality writing and it's a compelling story and you're glued to the page and engaged all the way through, you'll write out a story that doesn't have a lot of people to root for and doesn't have a lot of hope, because the storytelling and the drama is at such a high level. You don't get this reading a lot of other authors, viewing a lot of other artists. So even in one of the darkest stories, thank you, Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, for you guys, for your art.
Yeah, I agree, Skip. This is the first one of these I think I've read that I felt after I finished that I needed a bath and a shower.
And a stuffed animal.
Oh man. And can we just I don't think we talk enough. We proclaim Ed's writing as being so great, but it's more than just his, story, his imagination and these characters and these worlds and things that he comes up with, the stories themselves. The writing of it, the actual execution, the words that he puts to paper, for me, that is such an undervalued thing. It seems to be in comics these days. So few writers seem to have that, I don't even know what you'd call it, but there used to be, a lot of emphasis or value placed on, wordsmithing. And this is, why I talk about, a lot of people don't get why I like Frank Miller so much. And a lot of it is because, in his prime, for my taste, there's never been a better comics wordsmith. And it's one of the reasons when I read a book, the author, it's like, yeah, you got to tell me a good story. But if you're not really good in the telling, it doesn't, sometimes I don't care. I'm not, it's like Lord of the Rings is a great story. I love the story, but Tolkien's words play is dry and uninteresting to me. And so I just get through it so I can experience a story. But when I read Brubaker, not only do I get these fantastic stories and these wonderful characters, and it sparks my imagination, it makes me feel things, but I just love reading the words that he puts on the page. And that's, I think, something so undervalued, or maybe just not talked about enough. And I encourage people, you're listening to this podcast and you're hearing us talk about these books, and we're describing the plots. And sometimes if you're just not experiencing it yourself, you're just like, oh, okay, that just sounds like a story. But one of the reasons these books stand out above others isn't just because of the story he came up with. It's how it was told. Not a whole lot really happens in this book. And, at the end, like Eric said, it was kind of anticlimactic. But damn, if you just, every panel, you're just like in love with how it's being told. At least that's me. That's my experience. And I'm just, the words come out. I just want to read it out loud. I just want to, I want to just I can't describe. I feel a lack of eloquence to properly describe, but just, he's so good at this noir style of narrative, and it's almost like good poetry. And I don't know how to put it any other way than that. I think people that understand what I'm trying to get to maybe will get what I'm saying. But if you guys aren't reading, just pick a book up. You can pick up any of these criminal books. As much as I love this one, I don't know if this would be one I would start with, although you perfectly could. None of the books require you to know anything else, and each one will be additive as you read them in any order that you go, because you'll be introduced to different characters, and there's no proper way to go about it. They're just, each book has different characters, and whichever order you choose will be the order you're introduced to them. There's no linear message, but yeah, pick one up. Criminal 2019 would be a good start if you've never read a criminal book, or start with Coward. That's a great start. What about you guys? If someone has never read an Ed Brubaker criminal book, or a criminal-like book, what would be some good ones to start with?
One is at the store that you looked for at, because you can't really go wrong with one of these.
Okay.
And to touch on something you said, Ash, when you're talking about Frank Miller being your favorite because of his ability to work, wordsmithing ability. I agree. Miller's as good as it gets in comics. Kind of putting Brubaker on that same level. I think what separates Miller from the pack is he was able to do it with established, arguably the most established fictional character in pop culture, and Daredevil, another main superhero from from the other major company. Whereas Brubaker is doing it with characters of his own creation, kind of like Miller does with Sin City.
Mm-hmm.
I think, now granted, I've read more Brubaker criminal than Miller's Sin City, but I kind of feel I get more immersed in Brubaker's universe.
Mm-hmm.
I think now it also might have something to do with it. Miller's have been made into movies, and for some reason it escapes me, this has never been adapted.
I don't
So
know,
I'm
man.
kind of amazed by that.
I just wish. I mean, I don't know. I wish someone like a Tarantino or a Guy Ritchie or something of that ilk, man. Even a why am I drawing a blank on his name? God, who's the director of Goodfellas?
Scorsese.
Scorsese. Jeez, I don't
Thank
know
you.
why.
I was swallowing when you said that.
Or it's like a Scorsese, some great crime drama director, or a talent that I've never heard of could exist out there as well. Taking these stories, they just drip off the page to me. I would love to see them done in that light.
I'll let see Eric Overmyer try it.
You mentioned, it's funny, like you mentioned, Sin City and Criminal share a lot in common for me about what I love. Like they're both crime noir books. They're both very kind of almost like poetic in a way. They're very much romantic in a sense of how they view the world. The wordsmithing is something that they both are very capable writers, both at the top of their game. I think one of the big differences in the series that may play well to different audiences is that I think Frank Miller was a lot more lofty. His storytelling was a lot more stylized, a lot more dreamlike, very less attached to reality, where Brubaker's feels like this is the concrete, like you could step into Detroit in 1970 and this is what it would feel like, Yeah.
Oddly enough, Daredevil seems more realistic than Sin City.
Oh, for sure.
And that's me agreeing with that point. It's
Did you agree with me, Eric?
Yeah, it's almost like Sin City is almost like the second cousin to Dick Tracy, almost kind of with just the people, like just the bizarre characters,
right?
But anyway, so I said I see where it's we've hit the 90-minute mark, so
well, now's the time, I think.
Does anybody have anything to add?
Really, a simple question, actually. This is just a personal one.
Uh-huh.
Breen, it sounded like you ordered yourself another trade of this, and that's how you read it, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Ash, how did you read this? Did you read it in one of your like hardcovers? Did you do it digitally? How did you read this one?
I read this one digitally, just for the simplicity of being able to pull it out. I have all three of the hardcovers now, but for convenience, I just ended up pulling it up on my iPad and reading it.
Okay, nice. I actually went through a few different ones. I started reading it in the OG Icon hardcover, and then I transitioned over to reading it in the new Volume 1 Criminal Deluxe hardcover that was reissued from Image Comics. The only there wasn't much of a difference at all, and the page numbers and everything else was consistent. There are some extras though that are in the back of the newer hardcover from Image that weren't in the back of the original Icon one. So just for some of our viewers and listeners that might be like in the elite club of collecting, I just wanted to point that out. If you have the old Icon hardcovers, there are a few extras that are not in that one that are in the Image reissue. So, and there's actually a short story in there too that's pretty cool. As we're going through all these books, I'm sure there'll be a point in time where we probably end up going through all of them. But I think it would be cool, especially since this was like 3 vignettes. I remember the short story that was in that Dark Horse noir book. That was actually a short story that had kind of 3 vignettes within a short story. We might have to like collect all the trailers and short stories and do like a criminal cast from just covering the short stories and the little trailers that are in some of the hardcovers and other books out there. But that was it. That's the
Yeah.
last thing I had to add.
That sounds like a great idea. I will lean on you and Eric some on that, because you're a lot more aware of what's out there and what exists and needs to be read. I'm still kind of putting it all together. But that like is a good segue into what are we going to do next? We got 2 weeks until the next Criminal Cast, if that works for everybody. We need to pick a book. Does anyone have any? I'm good with another criminal book.
I'm too.
And then, not too long, we'll have another. What's it called? The new series.
Oh, Reckless.
Reckless, because the next one comes out in October.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have one of those to do, and we'll probably do that, I imagine, since it's a new book close to the release.
I'm good with that.
So
I'm down to do a Bad Night next. I mean, it is the next one in the series, but that was one that I really enjoyed, and it covers Jacob, who we're familiar with from Bad Weekend and Lawless too.
I'm absolutely down with Bad Night. Eric, do you have any nominations, or what would you?
I was thinking maybe Bad Night.
Oh, Bad Night. What about you, Skip? Are you good with doing that one?
I kind of don't want to do that one. I was thinking maybe if we kind of switch it up a little bit and did Bad Night, that would be pretty cool.
Well, I'm flexible. Yeah, I really kind of wanted to do Bad Night, but if you want to do Bad Night, we can do Bad Night.
I mean, I guess it's settled. If Ash is in agreement, then
yeah. I mean, yeah, I'll have to stick with Skip. I think since if he wants to do his original, well, so we'll do Bad Night, I think.
All right.
And
I mean, that was like pulling teeth, but it's settled.
Settled. It's just like the science. It is settled. So Bad Night, ladies and gentlemen. So if you guys there, you can see, if you're able to see on the screen, that is volume 4 of the criminal series. You can get them in trade paperbacks. I believe that appears in volume 2 of the hardcovers. Am I correct on that one, Skip?
That is correct.
So if you have the hardcovers, you can find it in volume 2. You can also get these on Comixology if you like digital. There is a image sale going right now in Comixology, of which several Brubaker books are available at discounted prices, including my pick for best comic of 2020, which was Pulp. That one is on sale. There was, I think Dead and the Dying, not Dead and the Dying. Heroes Have Always Been Junkies. I think that was there. The Criminal Special Edition. There was like 4 different criminal books, I believe, in the image sale. So if you're interested in that and getting digital books to read at cheaper than physical copy prices, I'm talking like $5 for a trade type price, go check that out. And honestly, if you're not reading these criminal books, I understand where you're coming from, because it took me a little bit. These guys will both attest. Like, I didn't jump on the criminal bandwagon right away, because I was just like, I'm all about capes and I like sci-fi and stuff like that, which is weird because Sin City is one of my favorite things, but it didn't seem like it was going to be my cup of tea. I was looking at these covers and being like, yeah, okay, they're crime books. I'm sure they're probably fine, whatever. But when I read them, they were way beyond fine. I was just, like I said, but in the beginning of the show, it just is next level writing. And when the writing is this good, it transcends genre for me. Like, I would rather read a genre that I'm not interested in, but the writing is so phenomenal, than a genre that I am interested in, but the writing's just average. And just try it out. You don't have to forego everything else you love, but push your boundaries, challenge your comfort zone, and you might find the very next thing that you fall in love with. And any final thoughts from you guys?
Nope. We will we'll have a Bad Night in 2 weeks here on this Criminal Cast.
Well, I cannot wait
criminals there
for a bad night in 2 weeks. That's going to be great. In fact, oh man, it will be a bad night. I'm going to be a year older.
Ah.
My birthday is on the 26th.
50?
Not quite.
49?
Not that bad of a night, Eric. 48.
Oh, 48. Okay.
Nice.
You still young.
Yeah. I wish I felt it. But yeah, we'll be having a bad night then. So come join us, please. Bring yourself something to drink, maybe something to snack on. And like I said, it's better, I think, if you're listening to us, it's better that you read it too, and you can participate and geek out with us. And I want to hear not just what these two jokers have to say. I want to hear what you guys have to say. So they're not really jokers. I just say that to make myself feel better. But thank you, everyone, for coming to join us. And if you made it this far on watching it afterwards, I doubly appreciate that. Leave comments down below if you're on the YouTubes. Or you can reach out to any of us on, the Twitters, at Ash1138, at Skipintosh, or at Eric Sean Breen 1. And I guess we're out of here.
All right. Good night, kids.
Later.